The next industry we're going to be analyzing is going to be the pharmaceutical industry. We're going to be looking at the companies of AstraZeneca, Pfizer, Merck, Novartis, and Gilead. So currently some trend shaping the industry. We have healthcare policymakers and payers are increasingly mandating what doctors can prescribe. We have chronic disease increasing, placing a greater pressure on our stretched healthcare budget. Growing number of healthcare payers are measuring the pharmacoeconomic performance of different medicines. We have boundaries between different forms of healthcare that are blurring as clinical advances render previously fatal diseases chronic and the self-medication sector expands. Demands for medicines are growing due to the emerging economies becoming more industrialized. We have governments that are being focused more on prevention rather than treatment. And we also have regulators that are becoming more cautious about approving truly innovative medicines. So once again, we're going to look at the liquidity ratios. My focus is actually going to be Gilead and AstraZeneca. With AstraZeneca, we see a decline in their current quick and cash ratios. With Gilead, we see a slight decline, but also a big jump over from 2012, and they are actually leading the pack in terms of short-term solvency. There we go. Next, we're looking at their amount of leverage, if they can afford their debt, and the total asset turnover. We see AstraZeneca take on more debt than the rest of the companies around them, but not too much more. Gilead is right behind them, and then we have Novartis hardly taking any at all. Looking at the times interest earned ratio, none of these companies are at risk of not being able to afford what they've taken on. We see Gilead actually can afford it more than the rest though, but they have had a slight decline the past couple of years. Looking at total asset turnover, their asset efficiency, none of these are far above, none of these are going to be near 1. The industry average seems to be around 0.4. And we see AstraZeneca right in the middle of the pack, with Gilead once again leading, although they have had a downward trend the past couple of years. And seeing the profit margin, we see AstraZeneca have a nice increase since 2013, and they are actually the only company to consistently have an increase since 2013. Gilead jumped up to 55 in 2015, but they have actually dropped down a little bit again, but they are still turning a much better profit than the rest of their industry. We see on the returns on assets that once again Gilead's in the lead with a nice trend going towards 42.28 and then dropping back down to 24 again in 2016. AstraZeneca, they've had a nice little increase to 5.71, but it was a decline from 2012. And looking at the rest of the companies, they're still in a little better position. Seeing the return on equity, we see that they are driven by leverage more than the rest of the companies. This is AstraZeneca, but they are second in the industry behind Gilead and far ahead of Merck, Novartis, and if you were to account for the amount of debt taken on with Pfizer, they're still seeing a better return. Looking at price earnings ratio, we see Gilead has had a steady decline since 2013, with AstraZeneca having a bit of a decline as well, but that was after a big jump. And Pfizer stayed relatively stable, Merck has stayed relatively stable, and Novartis has had a slight increase overall. Market to book ratio, though, we have AstraZeneca with a nice steady increase, showing that they are undervalued in their industry. Pfizer has had a good little increase the past few years, as well as Merck. We see once again Gilead is showing the highest market to book ratio, but it has been a drop over the past couple years. So overall, we're looking at Gilead, and it looks like a really good on paper. We see that their return on equity is much higher. You do see a downward trend. We see AstraZeneca drop down over here, but now they have a nice little increase the past couple of years. And Pfizer has had a spike in 2013, but it has been a steady drop and is on a slight increase right now. We see with their economic value added, AstraZeneca far in the positive with their weighted average cost of capital at 11%. So that's going to be, if you're investing in the company, you're expecting to see 11 cents for every dollar that you invest. I'm not sure if I mentioned that in the last video I posted. So we see their debt's hardly touching that, so they're making good use of their money. We see with Pfizer, much of the same. They just have a lower weighted average cost of capital, but they do have a higher EVA. Merck is actually in the negative, so you don't really want to look with them, as well as Novartis, far in the negative. But they have no debt. They could actually probably take on some debt right now. Gilead, they are quite high with EVA, with nearly $9,000, much higher than any other business that we in this industry. Looking at these two, Gilead, AstraZeneca, we see liquidity, asset efficiency are both led by Gilead, times interest earned ratio and the profitability ratio. But one thing that I did not mention earlier with industry trends, despite how good Gilead has been looking on paper, they have recently been projected to drop sales by over 22% due to lower demand for the company's hepatitis C drug, something that they heavily rely on. So they have been able to help decrease the amount of hepatitis C in the country, but it is hurting their profits. So we're going to have to go with AstraZeneca. I was going to say this, I think I should go with Pfizer. And I'm going to stop right there.